Welcome back to Newsday. Thank you for staying with us. Let's return to one of our top stories. The visit to the UK of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which comes at a time of mass protests back home against his overhaul of the judiciary. Well, for more on this visit, we can cross live to London and speak with our ICE correspondent, Lape Olarinoye. Lape, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Do we know what the discussions between Sunak and Netanyahu will focus on?
Well, actually, this trip to London has been rescheduled due to the uprising back home in Israel. It was scheduled for last week and, of course, rescheduled till today. And some of those discussions will center around what President Netanyahu has been discussing with other leaders across Europe. He has just recently been to Italy and Germany. And now in the UK, his foreign policy agenda will center on Iran's nuclear program. Essentially, the geopolitical issues that are happening within that region, and as well as the Western backing, Western support that he's basically rallying for across Europe to support the growing issues with Iran's bid to increase their nuclear capacity.
Right. Now, of course, you've already alluded to the fact that there is massive protest taking place back home for the Prime Minister against plans to reform the judiciary. My question to you is, do you feel that this trip is going to be a nod to the legitimacy of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu amidst all that he's going through at home?
It's an interesting question you asked there, particularly because back home in Israel, Mr. Netanyahu has managed to galvanize support from the far-right coalition groups, as well as ministers within the far-right part of his government. For that reason, the country is currently divided. But the pictures we're seeing there are from the protests that are currently happening across, specifically in Tel Aviv. They're said to be kind of mounting towards Tel Aviv, which is a more conservative area of Israel. So far, there have been reports of people dying, people being run over by cars because of the kind of backlash that the protests have faced, the kind of pushback that they have gotten from the Israeli defense part of the government. But the crux of the matter is that many people in Israel who are part of the liberal kind of the school of thought, if you like, do believe that this judicial reform would not allow the courts to have as much power as they had before. And in a case where there's an unfit leader, the courts will be unable to unseat that person, particularly because Mr. Netanyahu is currently facing corruption hearings and trials and so on. And so for this to come at this time seems as though the people's will and the will of the people isn't really being met. And for that reason, it's been met with protests. By the way, this has been the 11th week of protesting. But right now it has come to the fore, particularly because Mr. Netanyahu is not in the country, something which he was advised against severely.
Oh, thank you, Lape. Now, three scenarios which actually caught my attention, stood out for me were when, first of all, when the Israeli Prime Minister was, walking up to Downing Street and there were cries of shame. And there was also, it was rather toned down in that there was not necessarily any engaging commentary that was running between the two prime ministers and public comments. And also, the press was initially told that they would be addressed, but that was not the case today. So what has the reception been like for the Israeli Prime Minister? And is it indicative of, even more trouble?
It's interesting because currently in the UK, there is a lot of support for Israel and the Israeli government. But Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been advised not to roll out the red carpet for the typical state visit that would happen for any head of state. He's been told to basically tone it down a little bit. And of course, the opposition here, the Labour Party, have called against Netanyahu's visit, particularly because of how it would look, not only to the international kind of community, but also to those Israelis that believe that this is a dampening of their kind of freedom of speech against their kind of liberal ideology. And so far, it has been very kind of quiet. There have been said to be people kind of heckling the president upon his arrival. Just outside there, as we can see some of the pictures, heavy security presence and quite a lot of protesting. And there has also been a lot of kickback, if you like, from the kind of Arab community. I mean, I was reading a report earlier from one of the Arab leaders within the British community who is shocked and worried that the Prime Minister has kind of encouraged this visit. So there is a kind of dialogue there of different ideas of whether or not President Netanyahu should be in the country at a time like this, where there's so much turmoil in his country, and what kind of message, more importantly, does that send to people of the Arab community, and even for British Jews who are on the liberal side of this debate.
Right. Now, there are also reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be meeting with Home Secretary Braverman to discuss dealing with global terrorism. Do you have any more details on this?
Well, so far that is currently underway. I mean, we know typically when these kinds of visits happen that the president, the head of state that arrives will firstly see the prime minister and then, of course, later meet with someone like the Home Secretary and potentially the Foreign Secretary as well, James Cleverly. The details of that, I'm sure, will start to kind of build up across the rest of the day. But so far, it will, like you said, focus on kind of global terrorism, a stance that Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, is quite tough on, something that she has been vocal about, and I suspect it's something that they will find many talking points around. But for now, we would have to essentially wait and see what the developments of that conversation will be.
For now, we're very content with the analysis that you've given us. Arise correspondent Lape Olarinoye, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.